This is 100 Years of Cox. You are listening to a podcast by Frances Thompson. I'm telling the story of 10 siblings from the Machell Cox family through the letters they wrote to each other. They were born in England between 1868 and 1884. 7 of them lived in England and 3 lived abroad in the colonies. Dear Budgeteers, this was the title Aldwyn used for his letters to his siblings. In this episode, Cuthbert describes his 4-day march to camp with 69 boys from Berkhamsted School's Officer Training Corps, as well as camp activities, in fascinating detail. Arthur describes some events which occurred on the family holiday, including a ginger beer bottle duel between himself and Neville. Dorothy writes from Terrington, and Aldwyn's letter describing his recovery from typhoid fever, including his sickbed food and the amount of hair he grew during 7 weeks. Wilfred wrote several letters in this budget, giving us a real insight into the long disappeared life of a frontiersman in rural Canada. Cuthbert's letter. Studland, August the 12th, 1907. Dear family, I always seem destined to have more to say than I ought, and I find it very difficult to avoid being prolix. I will condense as much as I can. Enid seems surprised at our exams coming so early, but the dates are nothing to do with us, as we take the London University exams, and of course there is no altering their times. It leaves practically a fortnight over at the end of term in which regular work resumes, except for boys going in for army qualifying exams. It is certainly rather hard work for the masters to keep things going. Personally, I try some extra incentive, which may be wrong in theory, but answers in practice. Last year with my form, I had a scaled handicap competition for the last fortnight. I found the average mark per lesson for each boy and handicapped accordingly. Thus the top boy got a 1.25 handicap per lesson and the bottom boy got 7.25 per lesson. It was rather hard on the top boys, but I don't think that so very much matters. A boy in the middle of the form won, but it was a very close competition indeed. This term I tried something else. I divided my form into 3 lots. The top 5, the middle 10 and the bottom 5. The top 5 each drew one of the bottom 5 and the middle 10 were drawn in pairs. The 10 pairs then competed against each other. Work going on just as usual, the marks of the partners being added together at the end. Again I had an extraordinarily close competition and it was quite a successful experiment. We had no inspectors down last term, which was a blessing. We, however, had a visit from the headmaster of an American school, who was a delightful man and was very interested in everything and thought the English system of education far better than theirs. The ravages of measles were a great nuisance during the term, but luckily it was all over by exams. The billiard room at the club proved a tremendous boon to us masters in a truly extraordinarily wet term, and we had some splendid games. I bought a new tennis racket, an EGM, but have only played twice. I get less and less tennis each year. My cricket has been a complete failure. I have not made 20 runs in any innings. Founders' Day went off very well, as we escaped the rain on a threatening-looking day. Win Wilson, headmaster of Haileybury, preached the sermon, which was very good. He was a boy in Fry's house at Cheltenham, and also brother to an old Berkhamsted master, who was a great friend of mine. I showed him over the classrooms afterwards, and he told me if I was at Haileybury, I should not be allowed so big a classroom for what he called so small a form. Lord Collins, who gave out the prizes, was not successful as a speaker. He was very dull and he could not be heard. But I thought he was a delightful man to talk to in conversation. He asked to see me almost directly, and we talked before the speeches began. He told me the story of Owen taking his photo when he had his head between those railings. The next day, Friday, July the 26th, the corps, or rather 69 of them, started on the march to camp, headed by the bugle band. We only did about 9 miles the first day, 12 the second, 15 the third, and 18 the last. We slept each night at some farm in a big barn. The locations were all planned ahead. We had very good quarters, apart from the last night, where we had to try a different place to that of last year. The baggage, of course, went on a wagon with us. We had splendid weather all the time, except for 2 hours of rain on Sunday morning. People were very generous, and at 2 of our halting places we were entertained with refreshments free of charge. We had a fine repertoire of marching songs, but the most popular were the plantation songs. We used to have a sing-song in the evening and turn in at 9:30 and get up at 5:30. On the Saturday we had our only contretemps. We had ordered lunch to be ready packed for us at Beaconsfield to take it in the wagon to Cookham, which was our planned lunch halt. However, owing to some muddle, it got left behind, and we had some difficulty in getting enough food for lunch, as it was regatta day. On Sunday morning, we created a great impression marching through Maidenhead. We had lunch at White Waltham, in the grounds of a Mr. Brian Davies, who is a schools inspector, I believe. We halted that night at Binfield, where we attended church, and the whole village turned out to see us. Monday was very hot, and we were pretty well tired by the time we got to camp. We then had to get our tents ready, bedding filled with straw, crockery and other stores drawn before we had tea, which is always the best of camp meals, this time enlarged by really good Irish stew. The march there was a great success, and only 2 boys had to take turns on the wagon owing to bad feet, which was a very good record. Colonel Gough, V.C., was brigadier of the 4 battalions. We were in battalion number 4 under Lord Henniker. Our lines were next to the road, always an advantage as you have more room. Our nearest neighbours were Charterhouse and City of London. We were worked pretty hard this year. Up at 5:30, parade 6:15, breakfast 7:30, parade at 9, dinner between 12:30 and 1, parade at 4:15, tea at 6, sing-song at 8:15, lights out at 10. The last 3 days were field days, so we had no parade before breakfast, but had that meal at 7 and paraded at 8 or earlier. We had some very interesting field days, much better than usual, and I did a good deal of scouting work. There was always a great rush to get things done before breakfast. There was a cup offered by Lord Liverpool for the best school as regards general smartness of turnout and cleanness of lines. This we won. Our chief rivals, between whom the final selection was made, being Rugby, Winchester and Bradfield. The cup was presented to us by Lord Roberts on the last day at the close of a field day which had taken place in the pouring rain. As we had been crawling about on our stomachs for some hours in wet grass, we hardly looked smart then. Lord Roberts made a very nice little speech and congratulated us on our march to camp. The army sports were held while we were at camp, and a cup was offered for the public school's 220 yards. Our man, Messon, won easily from 25 entrants. Altogether we had a delightful time, and I was in an awfully good tent, all uppers. On the last morning we were up at 4:30, so I was pretty tired when I got to Berkhamsted. In fact, I went to sleep on the bus going across London, in the train going down to Berkhamsted, and at intervals all the rest of the day, and at Studland the next day. It is quite impossible for any of you, except perhaps Edmund, to realise in the least what a grand time one has at camp. I will leave Studland to Arthur to describe. I have had a marvellous time and am more than satisfied with it. The discussion as to the heats problem must now cease. I have made it clear to Arthur now, I think, and I hope to explain matters to Edmund in a day or two. But please don't think I was trying to defend the folly of the judges. I was merely trying to relate events as they happened. The Richmond School court case is not finished yet, as the verdict went against the master on a technical legal point, and an appeal has been made. Soda mints, Enid, as Avis gives no answer, are an invaluable aid to digestion. Edmund, my condolences on your illness. I hope you will be in fine form for the bicycling tour. Your affectionate brother, Cuthbert. Notes on Cuthbert's letter. Founders' Day and speeches and prizes. Nothing really changes. Many schools still do the exact same thing today. I've not been able to work out who Lord Collins was, except that he was clearly a friend of Enid's, and her son Owen knew him as well. I have no idea what Lord Collins was doing, with his head between some railings, and why Owen was taking his photo. Sounds like it was a good story, though. Maybe Lord Collins also went to present the prizes at rugby school, which was where Owen was a pupil. Cuthbert says, we only did about 9 miles the first day, 12 the second, 15 the third, and 18 on the last day. If you are interested, look up their route online. Berkhamsted, then Beaconsfield, Cookham, Maidenhead, White Waltham, and then Binfield. Cuthbert doesn't say where camp was held, but Aldershot is 18 miles from Binfield, which was the distance they marched on the last day. I think it was probably the place where the schoolboy officers' training camps were held. I don't know how many schoolboys were in a battalion, but 4 battalions sounds like a lot of boys. 69 boys with their teachers marched 54 miles, which is 86 kilometres, in 4 days from Berkhamsted School. With all the schools Cuthbert mentions, as well as the many schools he doesn't mention, I think it likely that there were at least 1,000 boys on this camp, if not many more. Charterhouse, City of London, Rugby, Winchester. These are all famous old schools who ran an officers' training corps for their pupils. Presumably the vast majority of these schoolboys then went off to fight in World War I, which broke out just 7 years after the summer camp that Cuthbert describes. It's quite a sobering thought. Arthur's letter. Agglestone House, Studland, Wareham, August the 13th, 1907. Dear family, the budget has at last passed into my undisputed possession. So far as my enjoyment of it is concerned, I have already taken most of the guilt off the gingerbread by nibbling at it out of my turn. The budget in its present proportions really has as much reading in it, quantity I mean, apart from quality, as the average 6-penny novel. Neville's letter in itself is colossal. He is indeed, as the Reverend Hill invariably used to remark to parents at the Abbey School in Beckenham, a golden boy. What Neville does not know is not worth knowing, and I have a childlike faith in his guidance. He and I went for a grand bicycle ride to Ringwood last Sunday. On the way back, we purposely left the high road, but our route at times became more circuitous than was intended. At one place, our advance was impeded by a ford about 100 yards across and 3.5 feet deep, and after the inevitable consultation between Neville and the map, in which they first agreed to differ and eventually arrived at a compromise, we retraced our steps. Neville said, I believe, that it all came of our having taken a tertiary road instead of a secondary one. But as the scenery was particularly fine, we were content. Moreover, it was all right, because on the following day we found out exactly where we had gone and where we ought to have gone. We got back at 9:30 p.m, finishing up with 2.5 miles of loose sand along the shore. We found several new flowers, including rampion bellflower. Neville at times professes to jeer at our assortment of weeds, but he really is quite keen on them, and the other night some withered specimens were found in his bed. Yesterday we were adventurous enough to charter a rowing boat, just to show the yawning yachtsman that we are not entirely dependent on his aquatic experience. The outward journey, with Neville and myself rowing, was accomplished, of course, without misadventure, and our progress was so smooth that Avis and Cuthbert began to think that, after all, rowing must be as easy as catching crabs. On the return, however, we soon found that the bowsprit got mixed with the rudder sometimes. Avis, who was stroke, started at 32 to the first minute, and Cuthbert went at least one better, but despite all their efforts, the boat remained absolutely stationary. Neville and I gave sage advice very plentifully, but it fell on deaf ears. As a brilliant idea, a change of thwarts was suggested, and Avis went to 6, and Cuthbert went to 7, I think, or else it was vice versa. A very short trial convinced them that the result was even worse, for the boat unmistakably travelled in the wrong direction and away from home. After yet another change, they quite suddenly got into their stride, and from that moment they never looked back. However, they were considerably distressed at the finish, and both had to be lifted out of the boat. By the way, Cuthbert, may I suggest that it is well to number the pages of a lengthy letter? Avis, your account of the sports reminds me of an incident which rather puzzled me at the time. A well-dressed lady came up to me just at the end, and shaking hands with me, remarked with great affability, "Oh, how do you do? I hope someone has found you some tea. Did I shake hands with you before? Just like me, you know, but I am ashamed to say that I really cannot even now remember your name, though I know your face so well." While I was wondering who she was, and whether any of her questions required an answer, she had turned to someone else and was saying just the very same thing again. It has only just flashed across me that the fair unknown was Avis herself. Our landlady, Mrs. King, is full of oracular utterances, and I feel that I ought to be able to give a selection of them. But the truth is, I find life a little too short to give her audience. I overheard her telling someone the other day that she had 14 clocks in the house and neither of them was working. 16th of August. A duel between Neville and me has long been pending. It is likely to be settled one way or the other tomorrow morning before breakfast. I do not think that I am unduly apprehensive of the result, but I think it well to mention the fact in case this letter is never finished. A fair field and no favour is all I ask. An unusual feature about this duel is the fact that there has been one meeting already in which honour was not satisfied. The conditions were that each combatant should be supplied with a ginger beer bottle, very highly charged, and stationed at 5 paces apart. At the given signal, the bottles were unwired. The combatants were in bathing costume, as it was intended that the survivor should proceed with his morning bathe after the encounter. For myself, I had secured a large lobster pot, which served as a picturesque and fairly effective helmet. A few seconds of breathless suspense then followed, at the end of which, with a groan of despair, Neville announced that his cork had broken off and there was no means of expelling it to my detriment. I called on him to fall on his knees, for his last hour was come. He turned deadly pale, and helplessly watched my deliberate preparations and deadly aim, standing as one fascinated. Suddenly I turned sick with dismay, for in my turn the weapon had missed fire, and my adversary had almost literally slipped through my fingers. There was nothing for it but to postpone the encounter. But nothing is more unlikely than that we shall again be balked in a similar way. Yesterday, Mother drove to St. Albans Head and survived to tell the tale. We are told that this feat is quite unprecedented, and Mother means to charter an air hog if she ever attempts it again. Vera drove with her inside a Victoria, and in the wildest parts she either sat on Mother's knee or supported Mother on hers. Thus they comforted one another. The driver pleasantly assured them that he did not care what happened to the Victoria, as he had had a row with his boss that morning. However, all's well that ends well. 8 p.m, August the 17th. I am glad to tell you that honour is satisfied. Cuthbert, as Neville's second, insisted on our being placed 4 paces and not 5 paces apart. Bernard, who was my second, was too preoccupied over my camera and preparations for a photograph to look after my interests. 2 of my bottles of ginger beer missed fire, but Neville's at last went off somewhat feebly, and I was struck in the foot. It was a mere scratch. At this juncture, with rare chivalry, Neville passed me his reserve bottle and stood up to receive my fire. I was deeply touched. A thought came to me. In another moment I had fired deliberately into the air. But at 4 paces my adversary was a big mark to miss, and there is no doubt that another inch would have been fatal. As it was, my cork flew off with tremendous velocity, and Neville was covered with the contents of the bottle. My second claimed that I had made a palpable hit, but I was much relieved when Neville assured me that he had not been touched. We then, with one accord, rushed into each other's arms, and in our great emotion poured all the rest of the beverage over each other's heads. Then we bathed our wounds in the sea. This afternoon we had cricket. The seniors tried conclusions with the juniors, Cuthbert and the ladies, and the latter were rather badly concluded in 2 matches. The feature of the game was the fielding of the sunny-faced Sydenham colt, Bernard. The lion-hearted Veronica, who throughout carried her side, she has her fair share, on her shoulders like the genial Hurst, had twice fallen a victim to his deftness at forward point. When next she went to the wicket, she told this fieldsman, Bernard, that if he repeated the performance, she should fling her bat at his head. However, she was bound over to keep the peace, and presently the plucky stockbroker secured her once more with a splendid effort. Really, when I come to think of it, I have not described Studland to you very well, but most of you have seen it for yourselves. It is well nigh perfect. A feather bed is, from my point of view, the only fly in the ointment, in a manner of speaking. Father, at intervals, pines for whortleberries, and inveighs against lukewarm tarts. He has a prodigious thirst, and his motto is, "One swallow does not make a summer." If he ever ends his days in an asylum, I am convinced that his form of hallucination will be that he is an empty reservoir, and he will importune all visitors to fill him up with siphons. I am so extremely disinclined for writing that my letter contains few, if any, captious criticisms. I apologise for the omission, but have made up for it by my strictly veracious account of a few incidents of our holidays. I was glad to see Wilfred's interesting contribution. I hope that he has not knocked off any more ribs whilst playing cricket. As to books, I am going to let them severely alone, as I have already written a great deal too much. I am, dear Budget, your obedient servant, A. H. Machell Cox. Notes on Arthur's letter. Taking the gilt off the gingerbread. It's an old saying, one that I had not heard before. It is not gilt as in guilty, but gilt as in gold leaf. Apparently in the Middle Ages, gingerbread was decorated with gold leaf for special festivals, and this is what Arthur is referring to. By taking the guilt off the gingerbread, Arthur is confessing that he has been reading the budget before it was his turn. Father pines for whortleberries and inveighs against lukewarm tarts. A whortleberry is apparently a European blueberry, and inveigh means to speak with great hostility. So Dr. Cox was clearly cross with Mrs. King for serving a fruit tart that was lukewarm and not hot. Oh dear Dr. Cox, you may be my great-great-grandfather, but you were a grump. Mrs. King probably didn't have electricity in 1907. The house most likely was lit by gas lamps downstairs and candles upstairs. And I expect she was cooking on a range. She is making homemade fruit pies, feeding vast numbers of visitors, but you are grumpy that the tart was warm and not hot. Agglestone Rock is a huge rock on a hill about a mile from the village of Studland in Dorset. Agglestone House, where the family stayed, is still there, on the main road in the middle of the village. It is a large detached stone house next to the Wesleyan chapel, with the name Agglestone still above the front door. I've never been to Studland, but I found the house using maps, doing my research from Australia. The row of houses opposite the house are still there too, which blocked the view of the sea, according to Neville. 6 out of the 10 siblings spend the month of August there, as well as Dr. and Mrs. Cox, being looked after by Mrs. King, spending their days bicycling, bathing, having picnics, playing cricket and going on excursions. Arthur, Neville, Bernard, Cuthbert, Avis and Vera. Edmund arrives in Studland at the end of August. He arrives on the train along with his bicycle, and he spends a few days with the family before the bicycling tour sets off. Enid and her family are in Somerset, with another Anglican clergy family, Cyril's relations. Aldwyn is in Africa and Wilfred is in Canada. Arthur's wife and son are in Yorkshire. From the photos, it is clear that the Wimbledon aunts, who are the sisters of Dr. Cox, were there as well. It was clearly a holiday for the whole extended family. Some of the photos that Edmund took in 1907 have survived. He found them in the 1920s and stuck them into the budget then, prompting general recollections of a lovely summer holiday and a fine cycling tour. The men wear knee-length bathing costumes, and a bathing tent is visible on South Beach, which is 5 minutes' walk from Agglestone House. There is also a photo of many of the Machell Cox family, all of them wearing marvellous hats. The fashions of the early 1900s show how little skin was shown then. Dress necklines are high, and the men all wear a tie and a jacket. No one has short sleeves, despite it being August and the summer holidays. And you can see the noble moustaches that both Neville and Bernard were wearing in 1907. I've put some of these photos on Twitter. It is possible that Arthur is describing Mother's first time travelling in a motor car. Their father detested them, and Mother seems genuinely afraid, requiring Vera to look after her. Cadillac and Benz both made a motor car which was called a Victoria, so it was probably one of these. They were outrageously expensive. Very few people could afford to buy a car in 1907, and then you needed to be able to afford a chauffeur as well. I love Arthur's stories, and the way he tells them allows you to picture the scene completely. Arthur is wearing a lobster pot as a helmet, and they are both wearing old-fashioned bathing costumes. Their ginger beer bottles have been shaken up, ready for the attack. Cuthbert is Neville's second and is organised, but Bernard is a failure as Arthur's second, as he is more concerned with setting up the camera to get a good photo. And the anguish when the ginger beer bottles misfire. And then, sticky with ginger beer, they head down to the beach for a swim. It is all very believable and very endearing. Dorothy's letter. Terrington Rectory, York, 2nd of September 1907. My dear Budget, I fear that I have sinned beyond all hope of forgiveness. I haven't any excuses to offer, except that the days slipped by without my realising my responsibilities, until suddenly I had the shock of discovering that my allotted week was more than past. I am so sorry, but I will try and make it up next time. I have carefully measured Christopher's height again and find it is 50.5 inches. I think I must have had an inaccurate measure before. In case Avis forgets, let me explain that soda mints are tabloids strongly recommended for indigestion. I feel so dreadfully stupid this afternoon, I am afraid I must stop. This is not a letter, I know, only an apology. Your affectionate sister, Dorothy. Notes on Dorothy's letter. Dorothy and little Christopher have just spent the summer at Terrington Rectory, staying with her family. Terrington is a small village just north of York, where Dorothy's father was the rector. Terrington is close to another small village, Barton-le-Street, which was where Dr. Cox was rector in the 1880s, which was no doubt how Dorothy and Arthur met, both of them the children of neighbouring Church of England village vicars. I have a glorious family photo from 1892 of Enid and Cyril's wedding, with everyone standing on the tennis lawn in front of the rectory in Barton-le-Street. One of the suffragan bishops of York used to live there, but the church no longer owns the house in Barton-le-Street, and the tennis lawn is also no longer there. Arthur goes to Studland with his siblings and parents in August, but he spends the rest of the summer at Terrington with his wife and son. Dorothy's tuberculosis is never mentioned in the budget, but this was no doubt the reason why she and Christopher spend so much of the year in Yorkshire rather than in Plymouth. Dorothy's health is probably also the reason why Arthur did not join his siblings on the bicycling tour, despite wanting to. Avis liked soda mints, which were apparently good for indigestion, and Enid wondered what she was talking about. But the bit that interests me is that Dorothy calls them tabloids. I had no idea that the word tabloid was used to describe what we today refer to as tablets, another word that the siblings use, which I don't believe is used today. I'm not very good at measurements in imperial, so I had to work this one out. In her previous letter, Enid remarked that Dorothy had written saying that Christopher was 50.25 inches tall. 3 weeks later, she wrote to Mother saying he was now 51.5 inches tall. A gain of 1.25 inches in 3 weeks is phenomenal, says Enid. Christopher, Dorothy's son, is 8 years old, and Hazel, Enid's daughter, is 7 years old. In the summer of 1907, they were both about 1.2 metres tall, but Christopher was 2 inches taller than Hazel, which is about 5 centimetres. Aldwyn's letter. The Hospital, Kota Kota, University's Mission, Lake Nyasa, British Central Africa, June the 20th, 1907. Dear Budgeteers, I feel so inspired after just finishing reading the last budget that I feel I must at once start to write a contribution. I have many criticisms to make, both in the way of rebuke and praise, but they will be so out of date when they reach you that I intend to reserve them for the times when I write to the individual writers concerned. This, I hope, shows you that I do not wish this letter to be considered as wiping off old scores in the way of letters received from Budgeteers. I must say also that I do not at all agree with Neville's dictum as to slovenliness in punctuation, style, etc. I think it is a duty always to read a letter through after writing it. Otherwise it is apt to be irritating, as Enid declares. May I say in passing that I don't at all approve of the style of the first page of this letter, or of my frequent use of brackets. I say this to save others the trouble of criticising. Another remark that I am sure the other colonial contributors will agree with is that the literary supplements are terribly but inevitably tantalising. There are no new books out here. Books as Christmas presents would be gratefully received and very much appreciated. I keep having to stop and start due to arranging the chair and the sheet for a glorious dislocation of the accumulated locks of innumerable weeks. You really would not believe the length of my hair and beard. By the by, I couldn't help starting this letter with a somewhat childish address. My pen seemed to run quite of its own accord. I quite like the word budgeteer. There seems to be a vaguely military twang about the word, which seemed inevitable and appropriate, as I have been reading many papers, all of which are full of Haldane's army reforms and Lord Roberts' speeches about universal training. I felt that at any rate 5, possibly more of the budgeteers can with justice plead that they have had sufficient training to allow them to be exempt from further efforts in that direction. I expect you have all heard long ago from Mother that I have been indulging in an attack of typhoid fever. I wrote her an exclusively fever letter dealing therewith, so I needn't repeat it all here. It may interest you, however, to know that I have started this letter propped up in bed, sucking on an acid drop. I have a really big appetite of late, and my boy, who is an unusually big and powerful native, a married man, has on several occasions remarked after a meal, mukata, which is the equivalent for telling me I am comfortably stuffed, and is the expression which they use to describe their own condition after a heavy meal. It is most realistically visible in the case of little children. Their rotundity and expansion, notably in father's favourite region, is really remarkable. Is this vulgar enough for you, Bernard or Cuthbert? As for my own feeding, it was really most embarrassing to be told, after drinking a little medicine glassful of some concoction or other, that this was the concentrated essence of 2 chickens. This happened 2 or 3 times a day. Besides this, the doctor and nurse chuckled over the large pile of empty tins of Brand's essence of meat, not to mention gallons of milk. The doctor states that when I was suffering from the fever, he used to sit with me from 7 p.m. to midnight, and he was summoned about every 20 minutes or so by cries of "milk" from the bed. Personally, however, I feel sure it was "milk, please." From this I proceeded on to the soup and milk pudding stage, and now I practically eat the same food as other people, except that where there is any choice available, I am not allowed to make it. I guess I have chattered enough now on one of the forbidden subjects of home table talk. A remark to be made in private to Mother: keep your hair on. I'm pretty fit in myself, except that I can't get back proper circulation in my feet, with the result that they don't feel as if they really belonged to my body. I perambulate my room and the surroundings of the hospital periodically to try and get over this, but my boy tells me I walk like a baby. By the by, my boy rejoices in the name which Edmund doesn't use. June the 25th. I have just been rereading and reappreciating the budget before sending it on its way to Wilfred, as tomorrow is mail day. I feel quite confused with the frauds that appear in so many of the letters. Arthur has 2, apparently, 1 domestic and 1 literary. Vera has 1, Cuthbert has 1, and Avis looks forward to 1. Are all of these frauds related, I wonder? I enclose a copy of a snapshot of myself, taken just after I had been allowed to get up and dress for the first time. You will perceive that I am weighed down by a 7-week growth of hair, which I am pleased to say was very recently removed. The fringe of beard was of the same colour as Wilfred's. This photo is to be circulated once, not abstracted and then destroyed. I should like to point out to all budgeteers that the postage hither is only 1 penny, and that we are favoured here at Kota by our weekly mail, so that I can reckon on receiving a letter from England in about 6 weeks. The papers most acceptable here are illustrated ones. I get punch regularly from Kerwin at Workington. A little while ago it arrived very irregularly. I wrote and said so, suggesting to Kerwin that it had probably been extracted en route by jealous post office officials. Envious, suggests Bernard in the margin. The last few weeks it has arrived very regularly, but now encased in the outer covers of the Church Times. The first week it arrived I was most disgusted, as I thought it was a second copy of the Church Times, which I already receive regularly from Edmund. Many thanks, Edmund. But my sorrow was speedily turned into joy, and I am now delighted to once again enjoy reading Punch. Much love to all Budgeteers, both individually and collectively. H.A.M. Machell Cox. Notes on Aldwyn's letter. His full name is Harold Aldwyn Machell Cox, so his nickname, of course, was Ham. For decades he lived in a cottage on the island of Likoma, and the nameplate on the door was labelled Ham Cottage. Aldwyn sent a map of his house and its surroundings to his siblings, so I knew exactly where it was, in relation to the doors of Likoma Cathedral. I recently made contact with the Bishop of Northern Malawi, who sent me a photo of Aldwyn's cottage, which is still there, and Canon Kukoksi is still remembered with great affection by the older priests of Likoma Island. Edmund's first name is Edward. He doesn't use his first name, just like Aldwyn doesn't use his first name either. And Neville's first name was Charles, another brother who preferred to use his second name. Enid previously wrote that she was indulging in another attack of influenza, and Aldwyn says he is indulging in an attack of typhoid fever. Interesting choice of words. Do they feel embarrassed that they have allowed themselves to get sick? If we use the word indulging today, we are generally talking about having an expensive meal or a fancy bottle of wine and spoiling ourselves in some way. The Church Times story makes me smile. Poor Aldwyn. He likes reading Punch, but it keeps going missing in the post. But Aldwyn's copy of Punch successfully arrives again once his enterprising friend hides it inside a copy of the Church Times. There is much discussion in subsequent letters of the photo of Aldwyn with a 7-week growth of hair and beard that he posted to his siblings. The siblings think it hilarious and revolting, but sadly the photo hasn't survived. In the many photos of Aldwyn that have survived, he is tall, with unruly dark hair and intelligent eyes, although every time he returns home on leave, his siblings refer to Aldwyn's faintly yellowish malarial complexion. Wilfred's letter to Aldwyn, Lumby, British Columbia, 17th of August 1907. Dear Aldwyn, I am forwarding you the budget, and I think I am very virtuous in sending it on so soon, as it only reached me a few days ago. I hope you have recovered from your illness. I think you are in luck to be so well waited on. I suppose you will bring home a black valet to pull off your boots. By the way, what are your people in Nyasa land? Are they Negroes or Arab merchants? Is there any slave trade going on still? I am very interested in your country. How is the government carried out? And who is the governor, or whatever the head boss is called? We are having a lot of beastly wet weather now, and haying is at a standstill. I've been grubbing stumps lately. I've had 3 cricket matches this year, but it is an awful job getting down to Vernon in time to play. You will be surprised that the customs people opened up this budget and stamped it duty-free. Perhaps, as Neville would say, the uneducated handwriting scared them off. I am writing under difficulties and only have a pencil, so my writing must be exempt from criticism. Do you observe Avis's bad grammar? I am going to try and contribute to the next budget. Ever yours, Wilfred. Wilfred's budget letter. Lumby, British Columbia, 17th of August 1907. Dear budget readers, I was very glad to get budget number 3 and am sending it on to Aldwyn by this mail. May I suggest that recriminations about handwriting now cease? Allowances must be made for me, as I am generally writing under difficulties, with a pencil, usually without the benefit of a table. I am sorry that Cuthbert's letter did not turn up this time. I shall be glad to see it, however belated, and if it arrives I shall send it on to Aldwyn. It has been raining for the last fortnight. This place is generally known as the dry belt of British Columbia, but sometimes it does rain a great deal. Work has continued, so I have not lost wages, but it is very unpleasant. Fortunately, I do not find this a climate where one suffers from rheumatism. My present boss, Dixon, unconsciously gives us lots of amusement. One day last winter, quite at a loss how to employ his men, said, "Go on with your chores, but slowly." He is frequently to be seen expounding his ideas in general, with his arms folded, not working himself, and preventing his field man from working. However, I get on with him first rate, though his instructions are so weird that I frequently do not obey them. With regards to cricket, when I was playing in Vernon the other day, a man named Clayton, who was batting, made some ripping strokes between point and cover. I had not seen anybody else make them so well for a long time, and it occurred to me that he must be a brother of F.G.H. Clayton, who made 300 for once out in the Oxford Freshers' match in 1893, chiefly by using the same stroke. I spoke to him about it, and this man turned out to be Clayton's younger brother. I will not insert a note of exclamation to save Arthur's feelings. Arthur, will you illustrate your next letter with a portrait of Ponsonby, please? A character sketch, with contributions by all your budget visitors, would also be interesting. Harmsworth or Pearson would, I think, call it a symposium. Sunday the 17th of August. It stopped raining at this point, so I stopped writing and had to resume grubbing stumps, which is hard and dirty work. I hope budget readers will remember to take advantage of the reduced postage on magazines and papers to Canada. Everything is welcome, particularly in winter, as I dare say I shall be living almost or quite alone. I believe I would be prepared to read virtually anything. I had a splendid parcel of magazines the other day, for which many thanks. I look forward to receiving an impartial account of a family picnic at Studland. Who lit the fire? How often it was left to go out? Who forgot the salt? And what you did when it rained? I have the usual Sunday job before me, mending clothes. I wish Mother was at hand to darn my socks. I could keep her employed for a month. I wear out the heels and then turn them round and then wear out the upper side. I don't know whether it pays to buy good thick ones or cheap thin ones. I really can't be bothered with darning. I will return the earlier budgets if I can find them. Cuthbert's letter has gone astray this time. I find I have remarked on this already, but Cuthbert will understand therefore what an impression the loss of his letter has made upon me. It is time he had a compliment after being told that he poses as a teacher. I believe I am likely to have the job at Blue Springs offered to me, as the school marm is not returning, but it is not for me. I do not intend to be run by all the old women of both sexes. I remember when I was teaching in Hope, a loud, foolish parent tried to get me into trouble with the trustees for castigating his hopeful Sonny for cribbing. We had a meeting and I led him on beautifully. He maintained that corporal punishment was not legal, so I offered to read him the School Act. The regulation as to corporal punishment runs: a teacher should exercise the discipline of a wise, kind, and judicious parent, although I never met one in British Columbia, avoiding corporal punishment. There, he broke in, I told you so. Except when it appears to be imperatively necessary, I concluded. An old entry in the Hope School register ran, boy's name, I think it was young Hopeful again, Improper behaviour, 1 slap. Avis, do you still suck your little finger and ask advice thereon from your fellow caterpillars, or whatever you call them in your student's budget? I saw a badger for the first time the other day. Hollingsworth, our road boss, caught it on the Cherry Creek Road alive. It was a wicked-looking little beast. Neville will be interested to hear that the porcupines have all migrated, and sadly, porcupine soup is now a thing of the past. Ever yours, W.M. Cox. Wilfred's letter, Lumbey, British Columbia, 27th of August, 1907. Dear budget readers, please admire my writing paper. It is raining hard, and I am not going to toil across to Creighton Valley for more paper, and so I am using the outside pages of a circular, Legion of Frontiersmen. I am now in Blue Springs at Dixon's. Today I was supposed to have started pick and shovel work on a reservoir, which Dixon thinks can be made on the mountain north of here. I don't think it is possible. We shall see. Wages are $2 a day and board for 9 hours' work. Highly satisfactory. Rain forbids work today. I have just received the December budget of 1906 from Aldwyn and found it as interesting as ever. I congratulate the family anew on their letters. I very much enjoyed reading all of them. Arthur, I am interested to hear of Froude Minimus' history. I believe his grandfather wrote Oceana on the same plan, resulting in a charming book with a sublime disregard for mere facts. Cyril used to hold there were no such things as facts. Does he still? Might I suggest that in future budget letters might be written with a margin, to allow of underlining therein, as poor old Scraggs used to say to us at Tunbridge School. Margins would also allow for Edmund's red ink and his comments. The soil on the preceding page, I believe, comes from Creighton Valley. Geologists among you may be usefully employed in analysing it. I regret to hear, Bernard, that you think that Browning's poetry is prose. Have you read The Last Ride Together, or Fra Lippo Lippi, or Holy Cross Day, or Rabbi Ben Egra? If not, do so and eat your words. In general, I find Bernard's literary criticism most interesting and trustworthy, and hope that on the strength of this recommendation, the editor of the Times or the Saturday Review will give him a job reviewing books. Arthur, your school incidents remind me of 1 or 2 Tunbridge stories. If they are old, nobody need read them, and I expect Edmund cannot. Scene, 6th form room. The master quotes an iambic and passes it round to learn the authorship. Many wild guesses from the boys. Then the master says, "No, no, no, I think I must have written it myself." Same scene and same master. Hodson is an ingratiating boy and a would-be embryonic genius. "At what college, sir, would you advise me to try for a scholarship?" Master, earnestly, "If you take my advice, you'll go in for brewing." Vera, I hope your arms have not developed so as to shock the general idea of female beauty. I suppose, Vera, that you are now cultivating your hockey stride. Try a wait for age race with Arthur, Neville, father and mother up that steep hill near Sydenham Hill Station. I do like these budget letters, as it appears to be quite the done thing to write about nothing in particular. It is really quite entertaining, and I do hope you will all continue. Your Sydenham carol singers are not a patch on our coyotes. Still, the latter do not demand twopence, and are quite content instead with a stray hen or a sickly beast. I once mistook Neville's sweet voice for a coyote, or rather the other way round. I was in bed one cold winter morning in Creighton Valley when I heard a piercing yell. I jumped out of bed, ran to the door and yelled back, "All right, wait a bit, I'm coming." Another yell from my visitor, "All right." I yelled, "No hurry, Wait until I get some clothes on. A still more piercing yell answered me, and I found it was a coyote, who had given a faithful reproduction of Neville's voice. Another time, a mysterious and very plaintive voice was heard calling on the hills south of Green and Phillips. No, Neville, this is not the pig story. Phillips answered it at intervals during the afternoon, and finally it sounded again when we were at supper. Phillips rushed to the door and yelled again in great wrath. "He won't answer me," he exclaimed. "I suppose it is some silly fool having a joke. I hope he will hurt himself in the bush one of these days, and I won't answer him or go near him." It turned out to be a stray calf. Cuthbert, I agree with you. I am sorry Owen has not gone to Berkhamsted instead of the more pretentious Rugby. What are Dr. Fry's latest sayings or doings? Neville, you will be interested to hear what John Whaley said about you. "I heard it on the best authority, Mr. Cox. He has gone home to marry Helen Green. I know you will like to have Florence for a sister-in-law." Now I really must stop. My pencil, which measures about half an inch in length, is vanishing under my hand. Your loving brother, W.M. Cox. Notes on Wilfred's letter. I wasn't sure if Wilfred had been to university, but it looks like he might have gone to Oxford. Enid, who taught all her brothers, described him as the brightest of all of them. It looks as if he alternated between different jobs in Canada. He clearly worked as a teacher, as well as doing more manual jobs, such as building roads. It also sounds as if Wilfred, Neville, and Edmund all set off to the United States at a similar time, if not together. Edmund and Neville were in Kansas at the same time in the 1890s, and Neville was also in British Columbia at the same time as Wilfred. Blue Springs, Lumbee, Creighton Valley, and Okanagan Falls, the places Wilfred mentions, all still exist today. When Wilfred was employed in road building, the roads were unpaved and measured 8 feet across. Wilfred would not recognise the wide roads, the fly fishing, the golf, the heritage cabins, or the skiing that attract visitors to this beautiful area east of Vancouver today. The next episode of 100 Years of Cox will be all about bicycles. 6 of the siblings set off from Studland for an 8-day cycling tour. They cycled 186 miles, which is 300 kilometres, but they did take a few trains as well. But remember, this wasn't on paved roads. If you are interested in looking up the places on maps, this was their route. Studland, Salisbury, Stonehenge, Devizes, Bradford-upon-Avon, Bath, Chepstow, Tintern Abbey, Monmouth, Ross-on-Wye, Hereford, Leominster, Ludlow, Clee Hill, Cleobury-Mortimer, Bewdley, Stourbridge, Enville, Birmingham, Coventry, Kenilworth, Warwick, Stratford-upon-Avon, and finally they got a train back to Sydenham in South London. Machell Cox Letters is on Twitter, where I share photos and sketches from the budget. Or you can send me an email, machellcoxletters@gmail.com. You have been listening to 100 Years of Cox. Thank you for listening.